The cathedral bells of Merwin had not rung this loudly in 40 years. Soraya stood pressed against the cold stone of the western gallery, her fingers curled so tightly around the iron railing that her knuckles had gone white. Below her, in the great marble nave of the coronation hall, 2,000 wolves had gathered to witness the binding. She should not be here. She should be in the kitchens, where she belonged, scrubbing the long oak tables with the other servants, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, pretending she had never known another life. That was what she had promised herself this morning when she stood before her cracked mirror and forced her trembling hands still. But Kaelin had not come to her chamber last night. He had not come the night before. And so she had climbed the servants' stair to the gallery above the coronation hall, hidden herself in the deep shadow between two pillars, and waited to see with her own eyes the thing her heart already feared. The Alpha King stood at the altar. Even from this distance, even through the haze of incense and candlelight, the sight of him struck her like a hand to the chest. Tall, broader through the shoulders than any man had a right to be. His ceremonial coat was the deep blue-black of a winter sky just before the stars came out, embroidered with silver thread. His hair, dark as wet earth, had been pulled back from a face she knew better than her own. The hard line of his jaw, the faint scar that crossed his left brow from a childhood hunt. Eyes the color of old honey, eyes that had once looked at her as though she were the only living thing in all the world. For 7 months, she had been his secret. 7 months of stolen hours in the orchard behind the chapel, of his hand finding hers beneath long banquet tables, of him pressing his mouth to the hollow of her throat and whispering her name like it was a vow he would die to keep. When the council releases me from the old contracts, he had told her, the night he marked her, his teeth gentle against the soft skin above her hip. When my mother is well again, when the realm is steady, then I will stand before all of Merwin and tell them you are mine. Nothing on this earth will keep me from doing it, Soraya. She had believed every word. Her hand drifted, without her permission, to the small swell at her belly. The secret she had carried for 9 weeks. The secret she had practiced telling him 100 different ways, each version softer than the last, each one meant for tonight. A different kind of cold settled into her stomach now. The houses present themselves, intoned the high speaker, an old wolf in pale gray robes whose voice carried impossibly through the hall. Let the chosen daughters approach the throne of stones. Soraya stopped breathing. 5 women in long white gowns rose from the front pews and began to walk, slow as a funeral, toward the altar. Each had been groomed since girlhood for this exact day, this exact moment. Every step they took echoed through the marble like the click of a closing door. At the front of the line walked Imaris of House Forlund. She was beautiful in the way a frozen lake was beautiful. Pale gold hair coiled at the nape of her neck, skin like new milk, eyes a green so pale they looked almost colorless in the candlelight. Her family commanded the iron mines of the Eastern Reach, the largest standing army outside the capital, and a network of marriage alliances that touched every powerful pack from the coast to the mountains. The other 4 were a courtesy. The choice had been made before any of them had set foot in this hall. Soraya pressed her hand harder against her belly. "Look at me," she begged silently. "Kaelin, lift your head. Find me. I am here." He did not lift his head. The speaker raised both arms. "Kaelin of the bloodline of Merwin, last son of Queen Mother Vesna, Alpha and King of the Western Reach. The council has placed before you the daughters of the loyal houses. The realm awaits your binding." Soraya's mark began to burn. It started as a low pulse beneath her dress, the same dull ache she had grown used to over the past 3 days. But as Kaelin turned to face the line of waiting women, the burn deepened, sharpened, became a heat that made her gasp into the curve of her own hand. He should feel it too. The bond between mated wolves was a thread that ran through bone and blood and breath. Kalen took one step forward. His movement was strange. Soraya had watched him walk 1,000 times, through gardens, through corridors, across firelit rooms toward her bed, and his body had always moved with the easy grace of something built for hunting. But the man at the altar moved as though his joints had been set wrong, as though something inside him had been pushed aside, and a stranger now wore his skin. His eyes, when she finally caught a glimpse of them, were the wrong color. Not warm honey, flat, glassy, the eyes of a sleepwalker. A dreadful suspicion stirred at the back of her mind. Then, "I claim," Kalen said, in a voice as hollow as a cave, "Imaris of House Vorlund." The hall erupted. The sound was not joy. The sound was relief. 2,000 wolves who had feared a young king's wildness now released into a great roaring exhale that shook dust from the cathedral rafters. Soraya did not hear the cheering. She heard a single, perfect crack inside her chest, like a frozen river breaking in spring. The mark on her hip did not just burn now. It tore. It felt as though something was being clawed out of her flesh from the inside, slow and merciless. She doubled forward over the railing, her free hand flying to cover her mouth so the sound of her grief would not give her away. Through the burning blur of her tears, she watched Kalen lift Imaris's hand to his lips. He did not look toward the gallery. He did not pause. He did not, in any way she could see, remember she existed. A small, wrecked sound escaped her, lost in the roar of celebration below. Soraya stumbled backward into the deeper shadow of the pillar, one hand still pressed to her belly. The marble floor swam beneath her. Her shoulder struck stone. Her ankle turned. But she kept moving. The corridors behind the gallery were empty. Soraya ran through the silence with one hand on her mark and the other on her child, and the thought that came to her now, over and over, was the same simple thing. He chose her. He chose her. He chose her. She reached the small attic chamber that had been hers since girlhood. Her hands shook too badly to fasten the laces of her travel sack. She stuffed in the few things that mattered: her mother's pewter spoon, the small carved hair her grandfather had given her on the night he died, 3 folded dresses, the dried lavender she pressed against her wrists when the morning sickness came on too strong. And then, almost without meaning to, she stopped at the chest at the foot of her bed and lifted the lid. A folded square of gray wool lay on top of everything else. Old, worn soft. Edged with a faint silver embroidery she had stitched herself, by candlelight, when she was 12 years old. Her only blanket. Or rather, what was left of it. Soraya stood with her hand on the wool for a long moment, and even in the storm of her grief, the memory rose up clean and quiet. A winter night, 4 winters ago. She had been 17. The cold had come down off the mountains so hard that horses had frozen standing in their stalls. She had been walking the long road back to her village from the apothecary in Merwin, her feet wrapped in rags, her breath turning to ice in her hair. Halfway home, she had passed a ruined chapel by the side of the road, and there, on the broken steps, sat a woman she had taken for a beggar. Old, hooded, shivering so violently her teeth made a small clicking sound that Soraya had heard from 20 paces. Soraya had only one blanket, her grandmother's. She had stopped, knelt in the snow, and torn it cleanly in half along the worn seam. "Take this," she had said, draping the larger piece over the woman's shoulders. "I have a fire at home. You do not." The old woman had looked up at her then, and Soraya had seen, beneath the hood, a face that was nothing at all like a beggar's face. Old, yes, but fine-boned. The skin not weathered but smooth in the way of someone who had never worked outdoors. And the eyes. The eyes had been a color Soraya had never seen on any human face. A deep, burning amber, almost gold, with a depth that made her own knees feel suddenly weak. "What is your name, child?" "Soraya, mistress." "Soraya." The old woman had repeated it the way one repeats a prayer one means to remember. "I will not forget this kindness. Not in this life. Not in any life that follows." Then she had pressed something small and cold into Soraya's hand and was gone, walking away into the snow with a steadiness no shivering beggar should have possessed. Soraya had never seen the woman again. The thing in her palm, a small bone token carved with a wolf's head, she had kept around her neck on a leather cord ever since. It hung beneath her dress now, warm against her skin. She closed the chest, took the half blanket, folded it into the travel sack with everything else. At the window, she paused one last time. The city below was already lighting its bonfires for the new queen. Soraya pressed her forehead to the cold glass and let one last tear slip down her cheek. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered to the dark. "May the woman you chose make you happier than I ever could." She pulled her hood up, lifted the sack to her shoulder, and stepped out into the servants' stair. She did not see the figure standing on the high tower above the kitchens, a slender old woman wrapped in furs against the wind, her amber eyes fixed on the small cloaked shape disappearing through the back gate. She did not see the way that old woman pressed a trembling hand to her own mouth, as though in pain. She did not hear the voice, low and broken, that murmured into the night air. "Oh, child. Oh, no. Not you." And she did not hear, far above the city, in a tower window where a young king had finally been brought back to his own chambers and was beginning, slowly, to come back to himself. She did not hear the howl. It tore from him before he understood why. It split the sky over Merwin like a wound. It rolled across rooftops and through forests and over mountain passes, and every wolf within 50 leagues lifted its head and answered with a small, helpless whine of grief that none of them could explain. By the time Kalen reached the attic chamber, hours later, half-dressed and wild-eyed and screaming a name his guards did not understand, Soraya was already gone. 4 months later, the village of Hollowmere had nearly stopped wondering about the woman in the woodcutter's cottage. She had come to them in the deep winter, half frozen, a young widow, or so she said, heavy with a child and so quiet that the elders had taken her in more out of pity than welcome. The cottage at the forest's edge had stood empty for 2 years since old Master Bremmel had died. They gave it to her in exchange for her hands. Her hands turned out to be a rare gift. By the second week, she had set the broken arm of the cooper's son so cleanly that the bone setter from the next valley had ridden 2 days to ask her how she had done it. By the 4th week, she had pulled 3 babies from 3 difficult labors without losing a mother or a child. By the 2nd month, the village had stopped calling her the widow Erin, the false name she had given them on the first day, and had started calling her, simply, the healer. Now spring had begun to push its first green fingers through the black earth of the village gardens, and the woman who was not really named Erin knelt at her hearth, grinding dried valerian root in a stone mortar. Her belly had grown round and heavy. The midwife, old Branna, had laid her ear against it last week and risen with a strange look on her face. "There are 2 heartbeats, child," Branna had said quietly, "strong and steady, both." Soraya had not been surprised. There were nights the babies kicked from opposite sides of her at the same time, as though they were arguing inside her about which of them would be born first. She set the mortar down and pressed both hands to her sides. "Hush, my little wolves," she murmured. "Hush. We are safe here." It was a lie she told them often. They never seemed to believe it. The mark on her hip had not faded. By every law of her people, a rejected mate's claim should disappear within a moon's turn, leaving smooth, unbroken skin and a clean ache that slowly dulled to nothing. But hers had darkened. Some nights it pulsed with a heat that woke her from her sleep, and twice she had risen in the dark, certain that someone was standing in the corner of the room watching her. There was never anyone, but the feeling did not leave, and the dreams. Every night for 4 months, she had walked through a forest she did not recognize and found Kaelin waiting for her beneath a great white tree. He always reached for her. He always said the same words. "I will find you. I am looking. I am looking everywhere." She would wake with the taste of him in her mouth and tears already on her face. A knock at the cottage door brought her sharply back into her body. "Mistress Erin?" It was the voice of young Nessa, the chandler's daughter. Soraya wiped her hands on her apron and rose, careful of her balance. She opened the door to a face white with excitement. "What is it, child?" "Traveler's mistress. Come in from the south road. They were drinking at the inn and saying things. And Da sent me to tell you because you always want to know news from the capital." Soraya's fingers tightened on the doorframe. "What did they say, Nessa?" The girl drew breath. "They said the Alpha King has gone wild, mistress." The mortar in Soraya's hand fell to the floor and shattered. "He hasn't slept, they say." Nessa was speaking too fast. "Not properly, in months. He has riders out in every direction. He has taken apart 3 whole noble houses looking for someone. They say he has burned the great library of Vorhal because someone hid something there. The crops are failing in the eastern reach. The wolves of the southern packs are turning on their own herds. The traders said—" She swallowed. "They said the Queen Mother is the only one he will still listen to, and even she cannot keep him from going out at night to hunt for whoever it is he has lost." Soraya could not feel her own legs. "He is searching for a woman, mistress. They didn't know her name. But he has put a price on finding her." 12,000 silver crowns, Da said. 12,000. A fortune that could buy a village. Buy 10 villages. "And the new queen?" Soraya managed. Her own voice sounded like it came from another room. "The Lady Amaris. What do they say of her?" Nessa's face went a shade paler. "The traders said the marriage has not been consummated, mistress. Not in 4 months. They say the king will not enter the same room as her. There is talk in the capital of an unbinding. The first one in 200 years. Soraya pressed her hand against her own mouth. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. There was no reason in the world for Kaelin to refuse the bed of his chosen queen. No reason for him to hunt the kingdom for a missing servant girl, unless something had been done to him that night. Unless the empty eyes she had seen at the altar had not been the eyes of a man who no longer loved her. Unless they had been the eyes of a man who had been taken from himself. Soraya sank slowly into her chair. "Mistress, are you well?" "Yes, child. Thank your father for the news. Take a jar of honey from the shelf, the one with the blue cord." The girl took the honey and left. The light at the window was beginning to thicken into evening when Soraya finally turned her head and saw the wolves. They stood at the edge of the trees, 6 of them. 5 were enormous, the size of small horses, with thick coats in shades of gray and brown and one nearly true black. The 6th, set slightly behind the others, was smaller, silver, almost white, with a strip of darker fur down its spine. Their eyes burned, not the eyes of animals, the eyes of people. Soraya's mark exploded with heat. She gasped and clutched at her hip, the pain almost driving her to her knees. It was the searing, intolerable burn she had felt only once before, in the gallery of the coronation hall, the moment the bond had begun to tear. But this time, beneath the burn, there was something else. A presence, vast and exhausted and desperate, pressing against the inside of her chest the way a drowning man presses against the surface of the water. The babies kicked, both of them, hard enough to make her cry out. He was here. Not just his wolves, him. Her mind flew through her options the way a startled bird flies through a room. The back door. No. The wolves would smell her before she had taken 3 paces. The cellar. No. They could dig her out within the hour. The forest itself. She was heavy with twins, and the nearest neighbor was half a mile through deep woods. She was caught. A sound at the front door made her flinch so hard she nearly fell from the chair. A knock. Calm. Polite. The knock of a man who knew there was no need to hurry. Healer. A voice. Male. Older. Roughened by weather. Healer. My name is Doran. I serve the Queen Mother of Merwin. We have ridden a very long way to find you, and we mean you no harm. Will you let me in? Soraya stared at the door. The Queen Mother. The bone token on the leather cord around her neck began, against her skin, to feel suddenly very warm. There are people on the road behind us, Healer. The voice went on, gentle as a man calming a horse, who are not friends. We have perhaps a quarter of an hour before they reach the village. Please, open the door. Soraya rose. Her hands shook so badly that the simple act of lifting the latch took 2 tries. When the door swung open, she found herself looking into the face of an old man with pale gray eyes and a long scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his jaw. His shoulders carried the unmistakable weight of a wolf who had spent his whole life serving someone else. He looked at her face, at the curve of her belly, at the small blackened scorch on the wood of her doorframe where her mark must have leaked heat into the world without her noticing. His pale eyes filled with tears. "Oh, child," he said, in exactly the same tone the Queen Mother had used 4 winters ago in the snow. "Oh, sweet child, we have been looking for you for 121 days." Soraya could not speak. Doran reached into the inside of his cloak and drew out a folded square of gray wool, edged in silver embroidery, the other half of her blanket. "My mistress," he said, "asked me to bring you this, so you would know I am who I say I am." Soraya's knees gave out. He caught her before she struck the floor, and the babies, both of them, kicked once, hard, as though greeting a man their mother already, somehow, knew. From far down the southern road, a hunting horn sounded. Long, low, cold. Doran's head snapped up. "They are closer than I feared," he said. "Healer, Soraya, listen to me. The king did not choose Imaris. The king has never chosen Imaris. He was poisoned the night of the binding by a hand inside his own house, and he has been tearing the kingdom apart trying to find you ever since. But there is something he does not yet know, and something you must know before another minute passes." The horn sounded again. Closer. 2 horns now. 3. "The same hand that took him from you that night," Doran said, and his voice had gone as hard as a blade laid on stone. "Tried, 6 weeks ago, to murder the Queen Mother in her own bed. She is alive. Barely. And the people who did it have known where you were for at least 11 days? Soraya stared at him. "They have not killed me yet," she whispered. "No," said Doran grimly, "because they were waiting." Waiting for what? The old wolf looked past her, at the silver-white wolf at the edge of the trees, whose burning amber eyes had not, in all this time, looked at anything but her. "For him," Doran said. And in the same moment, from the southern road, came the unmistakable sound of many horses riding hard. The first arrow came through the kitchen window. It buried itself in the wall, not an inch above Soraya's head, and the long black feather still quivered when Doran threw himself across her body and dragged her down behind the heavy oak table. "Stay flat," he hissed. "Do not lift your head." A second arrow followed the first. A third splintered the front shutter. From outside, men were shouting in a language Soraya half recognized, the harsh military speech of the Eastern Reach, the speech of House Vorlund, Imaris's people. They had come for her. The babies were perfectly still inside her now, as though they understood that any movement at all might give their mother away. Her hand closed around the bone token at her throat. "Doran, listen." His voice was very close to her ear. My wolves are already engaging them at the tree line. There are 6 riders. There may be more behind. When I tell you to move, you move. Not before. Do you understand me, child? She nodded against the wooden floor. Outside, a wolf screamed. It was the most terrible sound Soraya had ever heard. Not the howl of a hunting beast, but the cry of a person trapped inside an animal's body, dying. That was not one of mine, Doran said. That was theirs. He drew a short curved knife from inside his cloak, then a second, and pressed the second into her hand. Silver-edged. It will hurt anything that bleeds, no matter what shape it is wearing. If anyone but me, or one of mine, comes through that door, you put this through their throat. Do not aim for the chest. They will be wearing leather. You have one good strike in you. Make it the throat. I have never... I know, child. You will. Stay down. He rose into a crouch and was gone, out the broken kitchen window in one long, fluid movement. Soraya lay on the floor of her own cottage with a knife in her hand and her hands wrapped over her belly, and she listened to the sound of people dying outside her walls. It went on a long time. She heard the heavy thud of a body striking the wall from the outside, the snarl of a great beast in close quarters with another. A man cry out. A real, human sound. Only this was rage and terror together. Another arrow striking wood. A horse going down somewhere down the lane. Then she heard something that turned her bones to water. A horn. But this one was different. It was not the cold, short bark of the Vorland hunting horn. This was a long, mournful note that rolled in over the trees from the north, and at the sound of it, every wolf battle outside her walls, every snarl, every cry, stopped, all at once as though someone had laid a hand on the throat of the world. A second long note, and then, after a heartbeat of pure silence, an answering howl. Not from one wolf, from dozens, hundreds. A pack, a king's pack. The bond at Soraya's hip detonated. She gasped, jackknifed, the knife clattering from her hand. The pain was not pain, it was recognition. It was every nerve in her body screaming a single name, the way a starved man screams for food. Her babies kicked, both at once, as if they could feel it too. Her vision filled with white sparks. He was here. Not a quarter of an hour away. Not approaching. Here. She heard through the broken window the sound of men running, not toward her cottage, away from it. Boot leather scrabbling on dirt, voices shouting at each other in panic, the whinny of a horse turned hard and ridden harder. Most of them were running. Not all. The kitchen door, the back door, flew off its iron hinges with a single kick. A man in dark leather stood in the broken frame, his face streaked with blood that was not his own, a long curved sword in one hand and a small black crossbow in the other. His eyes found her instantly, lying on the floor with both hands wrapped around her belly. Soraya saw, in the half-second before he raised the crossbow, exactly who he was. Not a soldier. The clothes were too fine, the boots too soft. The cold, flat eyes of a man who had been killing for hire since he was a boy. He had been told what she looked like. He had been told to make sure of her even if everything else went wrong. The crossbow came up. Soraya did the only thing left to do. She threw the silver-edged knife. She had never thrown a knife in her life. She had no idea how it was supposed to leave the hand. She threw it the way a child throws a stone, wildly, desperately, with both hands wrapped around her unborn children and her whole body twisting away from death. The blade struck home beneath the man's jaw. He made a sound that was not quite human and dropped to his knees. The crossbow fell from his hand. It struck the floor and the bolt went off and tore a chunk of the table just above her head. Then he sank, all at once, against the doorframe, and went still. The kitchen was quiet again. Soraya could not move. She lay on the floor and looked at what she had done, and the only thing she could think, over and over, was, I am a healer. I am a healer. I am a healer. Then she thought, I am a mother first. And she began, very slowly, to push herself up onto her elbow. That was when the front of her cottage was ripped open. It did not break. It did not splinter. The wall, the entire front wall, was simply torn out of its frame as though a giant had taken hold of it and pulled. Spring sunlight flooded in. Dust rose. A roof beam groaned and held. And in the gap stood a wolf. He was the size of a draft horse. His coat was not black. It was the deep, deep red of dried blood, with darker streaks running down his flanks like old wounds. His head alone was as big as Soraya's chest. His paws were the size of dinner plates. And his eyes were the color of old honey. They were also full of tears. Soraya could not breathe. The wolf took one step into her ruined kitchen, then another. He moved with infinite, agonizing care, the way a man moves through a room where a child is sleeping. He stopped a single pace from her. He lowered his great head until his muzzle was almost touching the floor. And then, with a small whimpering sound that did not belong in the throat of a beast that size, he laid his forehead, very gently, against the curve of her belly. The babies kicked. Both of them, hard, twice in quick succession, in exactly the place where his head had touched her. The wolf made a sound Soraya would never, as long as she lived, forget. It was somewhere between a sob and a howl and a laugh. And then, between one breath and the next, he was a man. He knelt in front of her in the wreckage of her cottage, his clothes hanging in shreds from the shift, his bare chest streaked with the blood of his enemies, his dark hair wild around his face. His hands were lifted toward her belly and stopped a hand's breadth away, suspended in the air, trembling. Kaelin of Merwin, the Alpha King who had torn his realm apart for her, looked up into Soraya's face. And what she saw there was not the cold mask of the altar. What she saw was a man who had not slept in 4 months. A man on his knees. A man crying so hard he could not get out a single word. Soraya lifted her hand. She did not know, even as she did it, whether she was going to slap him or hold him, or simply lay her palm against his cheek and feel for herself that he was real. In the end, she did the last. His face turned into her hand the way a starving animal turns toward warmth. "You are alive," he whispered. "You are alive. You are alive. You are—" His eyes dropped then to her belly, to the second secret she had carried out of the coronation hall, to the round, impossible weight of it under her hand. His face crumpled. "Oh," he breathed. Just that. "Oh." And the Alpha King of Merwin pressed his forehead into the folds of her dress and wept like a child. Behind him, in the doorway of her ruined cottage, Soraya saw the others. Doran, blood-streaked, holding his side, alive. A score of wolves in human shape, their eyes wet and their heads bowed. And behind all of them, half leaning on the arm of a tall young woman with a sword on her hip, half leaning but standing, an old woman in a heavy fur cloak. Her hair was nearly white now. There was a bandage around her neck that had bled through twice. She was thinner than Soraya remembered, and her hands trembled with the effort of standing. But the amber eyes were exactly the same. The Queen Mother of Merwin looked across the wreckage of the cottage at the girl who, 4 winters ago, had torn her only blanket in half for a stranger, and she smiled. "Soraya," said Queen Mother Vesna in a voice that carried in spite of the wound at her throat. "My son took rather longer to find you than I had hoped. I am very, very sorry, child." Soraya, kneeling in the ruins of her life with a weeping king pressed against her belly and 100 wolves bowing in her doorway, did the only thing left for her to do. She began at last to cry. For 4 months, Soraya had built 100 different versions of this moment in her head. In some of them she had screamed at him. In some of them she had struck him. In one, the worst, she had simply stared through him as though he were a stranger she had never met, and watched the realization of what he had lost open like a wound across his face. She had never, not once, imagined this. Kalen knelt in the wreckage of her kitchen with his forehead pressed to the swell of her belly, and he was sobbing, silently, the way men cry when they have been taught from boyhood that sound is a kind of weakness. His whole body shook with it. One of his hands had found the hem of her dress and curled into it like a child gripping a mother's skirt. The Alpha King of Merwin was holding onto her clothing as though she might dissolve if he let go. Behind him, in the broken doorway, Queen Mother Vesna lifted one trembling finger and made a small gesture. The wolves in human shape who had filled the threshold stepped back into the lane outside. The young swordswoman who had been supporting the Queen Mother eased her onto the long bench just inside the door and then withdrew. It left the four of them. Soraya, Kalen, the old woman she had warmed with half a blanket, and the two unborn children kicking gently against their father's bowed head. "Help me up, child," Vesna said. "My lady, you should be resting." "I have rested for 6 weeks. But not now. Now, child. My son needs a moment, and you and I need a different one." The Queen Mother rose, painfully, with one hand braced against the doorframe. Soraya tried to stand to help her, but Kalen's grip on her dress did not loosen, and she found she could not bring herself to push him away. Vesna saw it. The amber eyes missed nothing. "He has not let go of anything that mattered to him in 4 months," she said. "He will not let go of you for a long while yet, I think. May I?" She gestured to the chair by the hearth. "Of course, my lady." "Vesna, please. We are far past my lady, you and I." The old woman lowered herself into the chair and laid one fine-boned hand on the top of Kalen's bowed head. He did not lift his face, but Soraya felt, through the connection that now hummed between them like a struck harp string, the broken note of relief that went through him at his mother's touch. "My son," Vesna said, "has been a very poor king these last 4 months. He has also been a very poor son, a very poor friend, and a very poor wolf. He has been one thing well, and only one thing. He has been a man searching for the woman he loves. He has slept perhaps 2 hours in any night. He has not eaten a meal at a table since the morning he woke and found you gone." Kalen made a small sound against the folds of Soraya's dress. "I tell you this, child, not to ask your pity. I tell you this because in a moment, when he is able to lift his head, he is going to begin telling you what was done to him. And he is going to ask you to believe a thing that will sound, to your ears, very much like a convenient excuse. And before he says it, I would like to be the one to say it first, because I am the only person in this room who has no possible reason to lie." Soraya's throat had gone tight. "He was poisoned, Soraya." The old woman said it evenly, the way one might announce that it had begun to rain. "Wolfsbane in a base of moonbell root, given to him in his ceremonial cup the morning of the binding by someone who had been in our house for over 20 years. The dose was carefully measured. It was not enough to kill him. It was enough to put his wolf to sleep, to cut him off, for a single afternoon, from his bond, his instincts, and his own will. And during that single afternoon, my child, he was led through the binding ceremony like a horse being led to water." Soraya's free hand had gone slowly to her own mouth. "He said your name in his sleep that night. He woke 3 days later. The first thing he did was go to the small chamber at the top of the servants' stair where you kept your things, because the bond was telling him something was very wrong. And he found an empty room, and the half blanket folded on the bed, and a single gray hair ribbon you had forgotten on the floor." Kalen's body shook again, harder this time. "I tell you this, child, because I want you to understand. You have never been the woman he chose to leave. He has never chosen to leave you. He was taken from you, and he has spent every minute since trying to find his way back. Do you hear me, Soraya?" Soraya nodded. Once. Tightly. Vesna squeezed her son's bowed head and rose. "I will be just outside," she said. "Take whatever time you need." She was gone before Soraya could ask her to stay. For a long time after the door closed behind her, neither of them spoke. The light of the late afternoon had begun to slant through the broken front wall and lie in long bars across the floorboards. Slowly, Kalen lifted his head. His face was wrecked. His eyes were so swollen with weeping that Soraya almost did not recognize him. There was dried blood in his hair. A long, shallow cut ran down his right cheek. He looked, at that moment, less like a king than like a man who had been digging a grave for 4 months and was only now realizing the grave was meant to be his own. "I do not," he said hoarsely, "know how to ask for forgiveness for a thing I did not do." Soraya let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I do not know how to give it," she said, "for a thing you did not do." His eyes filled again. He looked away. "I went to your chamber 3 nights before," she said. "You did not come to me. I waited. I had a small speech ready. About the children. I had been practicing it for 2 weeks." His head bowed again. "I went up to the servants' gallery the morning of the binding because I had to see. I told myself you would refuse. And then you stood at the altar and you said her name. And the only thing I could think over and over for 4 months was he chose her. He chose her. He chose her." Her voice broke, and the sob she had been holding behind her teeth for 4 months came out of her in a single ragged sound. He moved without speaking. He gathered her in his arms, carefully, with her belly between them, and pressed her face into the side of his neck. "My heart," he said into her hair. "Oh, my heart." She wept then, properly, the way she had not been able to weep alone in her cottage at the edge of the woods, where weeping had been a luxury she could not afford. Now she wept the way a person weeps when there is finally someone to catch the body afterwards. When she could breathe again, she leaned back just enough to look at him. "I felt you," she said, "through the mark. I dreamed of you. Every night, under a white tree. You said you were looking. I told myself it was not real. But it was you, was it not? It was me, Soraya. My wolf would not stop. He reached for you every night I slept. The healers said no rejected mate's bond should hold the way mine was holding, and that the kindest thing I could do was let it die. I told them I would die before I let it die." She laughed. It was a wet, broken laugh, but it was a laugh. "You are a difficult man, Kalen of Merwin." "I have," he said gravely, "been told." A small silence. "I have something to tell you," she said. "I tried to tell you. The night of the binding, too," he said. He had laid his hand on the curve of her belly. "Twins. I felt them just now. From 2 different places." She nodded, unable to speak. His face, the face of a king who had lost a kingdom and not noticed, the face of a wolf who had nearly run himself to death, broke open, finally, into the first real smile she had seen on him since the orchard. "Soraya, too. Too." He kissed her then, on the brow, on the cheek, on the temple, on the side of her jaw, on her mouth. He kissed her the way a man drinks water after a long thirst, not greedily, but with enormous care, as though he could not afford to spill a single drop. When at last he sat back, his hand was still on her belly, and the babies were stirring under his palm in slow, lazy rolls. "Soraya," he said, and his voice had gone quiet in a different way now. "I have to tell you what is coming. We do not have long." "How long?" "A day. Perhaps less. The riders today were the second hand of those who tried to murder my mother in her bed 6 weeks ago. They are not the dangerous ones. The dangerous ones are still in Merwin, sitting at my table, and since they did not get word back tonight that you are dead, they will do the one thing they have left. They will take the city. Fast. Before I can come home." Emeris. Emeris is the youngest piece of it. Her mother is the architect. House Vorland has wanted my throne for 3 generations. They have a forged decree of unfitness ready to read aloud. Today's attack was meant to draw me south while their main force takes the citadel. Within 2 days, the silver banner of Vorland will be flying over the gate of my own house. Soraya was quiet for a long time. Then we ride tonight, she said. Soraya, you are heavy with twins. The road north is a road we will take together. Or you will tell my mother-in-law, who I've only just been reunited with, that you intend to leave me here with a dead assassin on the floor and the nearest surviving Vorlin rider only a day's gallop behind. I would like to be present for that conversation, Kaelin. I will bring tea. He stared at her, and then, slowly, despite the blood on him, the dead man in her kitchen, the long dark road ahead, the corner of his mouth pulled up. You have, he said, become very dangerous in 4 months. I was always dangerous, my king. You were simply too kind to notice. He laughed once. It cracked. It was almost a sob, but it was a laugh. He helped her to her feet. At the door, he paused. Soraya, before we go out there, I would like to say to you, in front of no witnesses but our children, that I love you. That I have loved you since the first time you put my mother's blanket around my mother's shoulders, though neither you nor I knew it then. That I will love you in this life, and in the next, and in every life after that, until the gods themselves grow tired and lay the world down. She lifted her face. I love you too, Kaelin of Merwin. I have loved you all along, even when I thought you had thrown me away. I could not stop. I tried. He kissed her once, on the place between her brows. Then he opened the door, and they walked out together to face what was coming. They rode at moonrise. The Queen Mother had refused to be left behind. I have been kept in a sick room for 6 weeks while my house burned around me, she had told Doran, in a tone that ended the discussion before it had begun. Tie me to the saddle if you must. Doran had not tied her to the saddle. He had, however, ridden with one hand always within reach of her reins. Soraya rode in front of Kaelin on a dark gray mare. He had wrapped her in his own travel cloak, lined with gray fox fur that smelled of smoke and pine and him. His arm was looped around her belly. Every so often the babies would kick beneath his hand and he would catch his breath, very softly, against her hair. By the second hour she had stopped pretending she did not want to lean back against him. By the third hour she had given up fighting sleep. She woke, near dawn, to find that they had stopped. They were on the crest of a low rise. The road they had been following ran down into a broad, shallow valley, and beyond that, perhaps 2 leagues distant, the spires of Merwin rose pale against the lightening sky. There was something wrong with the sky over the city. It was the wrong color. Smoke, thick black smoke, in 3 separate columns, rose from inside the walls. They have moved faster than I thought possible, Kaelin said, against the top of her head. Doran had pulled his horse alongside theirs. 3 fires, my king. The granary by the look of it. The western one. The barracks. And... He squinted. And the high hall. They have set fire to the high hall. They are burning the records, Vesna said. She had drawn her own horse up on Kaelin's other side. Every ledger in which a true bonding was ever witnessed and sealed. They are erasing the proof of what Soraya is, before we can ride in and claim it. Soraya turned in the saddle. What I am? Vesna's amber eyes met hers steadily. My son did not only mark you, child. The night he marked you, 7 months before the binding, he brought a witness. A witness? My oldest friend. A woman named Ilsa, who has stood at the bonding of every wolf in the royal line for 60 years. She sealed the parchment with her own blood. She signed it before 3 of the gods. It has been kept in a locked drawer in the high hall of Merwin. Soraya could not speak. He told me, the morning after, Vesna went on. He came to me, bursting, the way he was as a small boy when he had a secret too good to keep, and he said, "Mother, I have done the thing. The girl from the snow, the girl with the blanket, she is mine. It is sealed. It is real. I will tell the rest of them in my own time." I asked him then if he understood what he had done. He looked at me as though I had asked him whether he understood the color of his own eyes. He said, "Mother, of course I understand. I have bound her. She is my wife." The valley road blurred for a moment before Soraya's eyes. I am his. You have been his lawful queen for 11 months, my dear, and said the Queen Mother, by every law of our people that has been written down in the last 800 years. The binding ceremony in the coronation hall was, in legal fact, void from the moment it began. The Vorlands know this. It is why they have been hunting you. It is why they tried to kill me. It is why they are burning my house down at this very moment. They are not trying to make Imaris queen, child. They are trying to unmake the proof that anyone else ever was. Soraya's hand had gone to the bone token at her throat. Why did he never tell me? Because he meant to, said Vesna. When the council had given way, when the realm was steady, he had it all planned, child. I believe he had it planned down to the color of the dress you would wear. Soraya turned slowly and looked up at the man whose arm was around her belly. It is true, he said, all of it. You bound me without telling me. I marked you with your full and willing knowledge, Soraya, the bonding witness, the seal. That was the part I did not tell you. I will not pretend otherwise. I should have. I was 24 years old and the most powerful wolf for 100 leagues, and I had just realized I was not going to survive losing you, and I made the most reckless decision of my life and sealed it before any of them could stop me. I have been afraid for 11 months that you would learn of it through a letter or a council ruling instead of from me. I have been a coward about it. I am sorry. She held his gaze a long moment. Then she leaned back against his chest and let out a long, slow breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside her. "Kaelin of Merwyn," she said, "you are an idiot." Yes. A reckless, sentimental, terrified idiot. Yes. And I have been your wife for 11 months and did not know it. Yes. And our children are princes of the realm. A pause. Yes. She tilted her head back so she could see his face. Then I think, she said, we had better go and get my house back. Something old and fierce moved through him at that. The bond between them rang with it like a bell. Yes, my queen, I think we had. Doran cleared his throat very tactfully. My king. The smoke. Kaelin lifted his head. The soldier returned to his face, smooth and cold as a sheathed blade. Ride out the line. I want every wolf at this ridge in less than an hour. The south gate. The Vorlands will expect us at the north because the north is closer. We will give them the south. And the citadel itself, my king? The citadel I will take, said Kaelin, personally. My king? Doran. I have spent 4 months tearing this kingdom apart looking for my wife. You will not today ask me to send other men to fight in my place inside the walls of my own house. Doran bowed his scarred head. No, my king. Mother, I want you in the third ring with Soraya, Lyric on your left, Braun on your right. The old woman's amber eyes held his. Soraya felt the whole long, unspoken conversation of a lifetime pass through that look. I will keep her safe, Kaelin, Vesna said. I know you will. He bent his head to Soraya. I will be back before the sun is fully up. Stay with my mother. If anything goes wrong, anything, you do not stay to see how it ends. Promise me. She turned her face up to his. I promise. She lied very softly. He kissed her. Then he was gone, sliding from the saddle, calling orders, his cloak swirling around him like water. Within a quarter of an hour, the long gray ridge above the valley was full of wolves. Soraya watched her husband. Husband. The word felt strange and right and terrifying in her mouth. Ride out at the head of his pack. She watched him turn once and find her with his eyes. She watched him go down into the valley. And then, because she had not become a coward in 4 months, she turned to Vesna. How long until they reach the south gate? 20 minutes. And how long until we ride down to the third ring with Lyric and Braun? As soon as the line moves out. Good. Soraya gathered her reins. Then I have 20 minutes to tell you what I am going to do, and you have 20 minutes to help me do it. Because Kaelin is wrong about one thing. He thinks the dangerous one is the mother of Emeris. He thinks the dangerous one is a Vorland. The Queen Mother's amber eyes had gone still. And you, she said, do not. No. A horn sounded down in the valley, long and low, the signal to advance. There is a person inside the citadel, Soraya said, who has been listening to every word my husband has said for 4 months. Who knew where I was 11 days ago and did nothing? Who let the Queen Mother nearly die in her own bed? Who is, I would wager, the only reason today's assassin knew the back door of my cottage is the one that does not stick? Vesna's mouth had gone thin. Who, child? I do not know. Yet. But I know how to find out. And I do not think we have until tomorrow. The Queen Mother of Merwin looked at the girl who had once given her half a blanket in the snow. She nodded. Once. Tell me what you need. The third ring stood on a wooded shoulder of the hill above the south gate of Merwin. The south gate was smaller than the north, a side gate used by tradesmen and grain carts, not the great ceremonial gate the Vorlands had been guarding. Kaelin's wolves had taken it inside 10 minutes, the way one takes a door whose lock has been quietly oiled the night before. By the time the sun cleared the eastern hills, the silver-on-black banner of Vorlon had been pulled down and the deep red banner of Merwin raised in its place. Inside the city, the fighting was uglier. Soraya could see it only in flashes, figures moving on rooftops, smoke rolling sideways down narrow streets, the occasional bright glint of a sword catching the morning sun. Now and then a horn sounded, and once she heard, from somewhere near the citadel, the long, unmistakable howl of her husband, not in pain, not in grief, in fury. And every wolf around her on the ridge lifted its head and sent up an answering cry that made her bones hum. He was alive. He was advancing. He was, by the sound of it, very angry. It had been 23 minutes since he rode down into the valley. Lyric, Soraya said quietly. The young swordswoman who had been Vesna's right hand all night stepped to her side. Lyric was perhaps 22, long-limbed, quick-eyed, with a thick black braid that hung down her back nearly to her waist. My lady, how well do you know the kitchens of the citadel? As well as I know my own hand, my lady. And the servants' stair? Better. And the Queen Mother's solar? Could you reach it without crossing the Great Hall? I could reach it without crossing any hall used by anyone of rank, my lady. Good. Soraya drew a steadying breath. Then this is what we are going to do. She laid out the plan in 12 quick sentences. Lyric listened. So did Braun, the broad-shouldered older wolf who had been Vesna's shadow on her left side. And so did the Queen Mother herself. My lady, said Braun, the king will have my hide. The king will have my hide first, said Lyric, with the small grim smile of a soldier who had long ago made peace with the fact that her hide was forfeit either way. I am willing. Vesna, said Soraya. The Queen Mother had gone very still. You realize, child, that if you are right, you will be walking into the same room as the person who tried to murder me in my bed. Yes. And that we do not yet know who they are. No. And that you are heavy with my grandchildren. Yes. Vesna closed her eyes briefly. Then I will come with you, she said. Vesna. Soraya, The traitor has been someone close enough to my person to walk into my own bedchamber with a knife. Whoever it is, they will not show their face until they see mine. You may be the queen, but I am the one they have been afraid of for 30 years. So I am coming. We will argue about it if you like, on the way. Soraya did not, in the end, argue. Then we go now. They went down through the wood by a goat path Lyric had known since she was a child. It took 18 minutes to reach the postern of the kitchens. The postern stood unguarded. That alone told Soraya she was right. The postern of a royal kitchen on the morning of a coup should have had at least 2 soldiers on it. The fact that it had none meant someone had drawn the guard away on purpose. Someone who did not want anyone to see what passed through this door this morning. Lyric eased the latch up with 2 fingers. The door opened in silence. She had, Soraya noted, oiled the hinges herself sometime in the last hour. The kitchens were empty. Not abandoned. Emptied. The bread was still rising in the proving baskets. A great pot of broth sat on a banked fire. A chopping board carried the half-cut shape of an onion, and the knife that had been doing the cutting, laid down in the middle of a stroke. The kitchen staff had been ordered out, within the hour. Up the stair, Lyric breathed. They went up the servants' stair single file. Braun first, Lyric last, Soraya and Vesna in the protected middle. Soraya kept one hand against the wall to steady herself, and the other beneath her belly, and the babies kicked once, quietly, as though to remind her they were here. The stair came out behind a tapestry of a hunting scene in the long upper corridor of the royal wing. Lyric eased the tapestry aside half an inch and put her eye to the gap. She held up 2 fingers, 2 guards in the corridor. Then she made a small sign with her hand. A Vorland mark, painted on a shoulder. Lyric's sword left its sheath without sound. She slipped through the tapestry. There was a brief, very quiet flurry of movement. The soft thump of a body, then a second, and then her low whistle. They came out into the corridor. 2 Vorland guards lay against the wall, both alive, both unconscious. Lyric gagged them with strips torn from her own undershirt and dragged them into the linen alcove without seeming to break a sweat. My lady, the solar, around the corner, 3rd door. They went around the corner. The door of the Queen Mother's solar stood half open. Soraya could see, through the gap, the long room with its tall windows and its faded blue carpet, and its low couches arranged around the small carved table where Vesna had taken her tea every afternoon for 40 years. She could see, on the table, a tray with a teapot and 3 cups. 3 cups. 2 were full. 1 had been used. She could see the back of a head, pale gold hair coiled at the nape of the neck. She could see 1 slim white hand resting on the arm of the couch. Imaris, in the Queen Mother's solar, drinking the Queen Mother's tea. 3 cups laid out on the table, 1 for herself, and 2 for the people she was waiting for. Soraya understood then, with a clarity so cold it was almost peaceful, exactly what was about to happen. This was the trap. Not the assassins at her cottage, not the burning of the records, not the taking of the South Gate. This. The traitor inside the citadel had known Vesna would come home today, had known where Vesna would go first. The traitor had set out the cups herself, and she had laid out 3 of them, because she had known, for at least 11 days, that Soraya would come too. Soraya turned slowly and looked at the Queen Mother. Vesna's amber eyes had gone the color of a banked fire. Child, she breathed, step back. Behind them, at the far end of the corridor, came the soft click of a crossbow being leveled. Step back, please, my queen, said a voice Soraya had heard 100 times before. Measured, patient, gentle. And you, Vesna, and the rest of you. No one needs to be hurt today. Not yet. Soraya turned her head. Duran stood at the far end of the corridor, the old wolf with the scar from temple to jaw. the Queen Mother's most loyal man for 31 years. The man who had ridden 121 days to find Soraya in the woods. The man who had thrown his body across hers in her own kitchen 4 hours ago. He held a small black crossbow in steady hands. It was pointed, very precisely, at the curve of Soraya's belly. "I am sorry, my lady," said Doran, and his pale gray eyes were full of a tired, terrible regret. "I have been sorry for a very long time. It will be over soon." Soraya did not move. She looked instead at the Queen Mother, who had gone perfectly white, perfectly still, the way a person goes when the floor has just dropped out from under them and they have not yet finished falling. "Doran," said Vesna. Her voice was barely a sound. "Oh, Doran. You." "Me, my lady, I am very sorry. Please put your hands where I can see them." And from the half-open door of the solar behind them, Imaris of Vorland laughed, a small, bright, delighted laugh, and stepped out into the corridor with a thin silver dagger in her hand, and said, "There you are, sister. We have been waiting hours." For one long heartbeat, no one in the corridor moved. The morning light slanted in through the high-arched window at the end of the passage. Somewhere far below, in the streets of Merwin, a horn sounded and was answered. A wolf howled. Once, twice, a third time, very close. And Soraya felt, through the bond, the small jolt that went through Kalen as he stopped, somewhere in the lower halls of his own house, and lifted his head. He had felt something. He did not yet know what. He was already turning. She had perhaps a minute, perhaps two. She kept her eyes on Doran. "Sister," she said calmly, without turning her head toward Imaris. "I do not have a sister." "No?" Imaris had stepped fully into the corridor now. The silver dagger turned lazily in her fingers. "Are you certain? Same husband, same bond, same children, in a manner of speaking. Mine were never born, of course, but the marks of a binding leave a kind of mother in a woman, whether the body cooperates or not. I do think of you as a sister." "Imaris," said Vesna, "be silent." "Mother-in-law, with respect, be silent yourself." Soraya did not look at her. "Doran, how long?" He understood the question. He did not pretend not to. 26 years, my queen." Vesna made a small sound. It was not a word. 26 years, Doran went on. The crossbow did not waver. "Lord Vorland came to me when I was a young man and very foolish, and had a sister in the south whose husband had run her into debts she could not climb out of. He simply paid the debts, and then, for 26 years, he asked me, every now and then, for very small things. Most of them I told myself were nothing." "And the night of the binding?" Soraya asked. Doran's pale eyes did not leave her. "The night of the binding, my queen, I put 3 drops of moonbell oil into the king's ceremonial cup. I had been carrying the vial for 11 years. I had been told I might never have to use it. When I used it, I was told my sister's grandchildren would never want for anything as long as they lived. And 6 weeks ago," Vesna said, "when someone came into my bedchamber at the 3rd hour past midnight with a knife. That was me, my lady. I am sorry. You woke. You raised your hand against the blade and I struck through it before I struck your throat. I struck the throat instead of the heart because at the last moment my hand would not do what I had told it to. I have been telling myself since that this was loyalty. I think it was cowardice. I no longer know there is a difference." "Doran," Vesna whispered, "I held you when your sister died. I held your hand at her grave." "Yes, my lady. You did. I have not forgotten." The crossbow did not waver. "Step back into the solar," he said. "All of you. You will sit. You will drink the tea Lady Imaris has so kindly prepared. You will do this calmly because if you do not, I will put this bolt through Her Majesty's belly, and I will be very, very sorry, but I will do it." Lady Amaris was clear about that part. Soraya did not move. She felt, at the back of her mind, the steady pressure of her husband's wolf coming up the stair. He had felt the spike of fear in her. He was running. He was 3 turns of the corridor away, 2. He would not be in time. She had seconds. She did the only thing left to do. She stepped slowly between Vesna and the crossbow. "No," said the Queen Mother sharply. "Child, no. Doran, look at me." He looked at her. "You held this woman's hand at your sister's grave," she said. "She held you when you wept. You have served her for 31 years. You rode 121 days to find me, when the king ordered it. And you wept on the threshold of my cottage when you saw I was alive. Were you lying to yourself then, Doran? Or are you lying to yourself now?" His jaw tightened. The crossbow did not move. "My queen." "Look at me, Doran. Look at the woman the king sent you to find. Look at the woman whose half of the blanket you put into my hand. Tell me, looking at me, that you are about to put this bolt through me and through my children. Tell me to my face." His pale gray eyes flickered. It was the smallest movement. A hesitation no longer than a breath. It was enough. A blur of black and silver came down the corridor behind him from the kitchen stair. Soraya did not see, exactly, what Lyric did with the flat of her sword. She saw only Doran's eyes go suddenly unfocused, the back of his skull take a heavy blow, and then she saw him crumple to his knees and onto his side, the crossbow falling from a hand that had stopped obeying him. The bolt did not fly. He breathed against the stone. Slow, ragged, but breathing. Imaris screamed. It was not a clean sound. It was the small high sound of a child whose toy has been taken away. She lunged, the silver dagger outstretched, not at Soraya, but at Vesna, straight at the bandage at the old woman's throat. Soraya, without thinking, stepped sideways into the line of the strike. The dagger caught her along the outside of her left forearm. It opened a long, shallow cut from elbow to wrist. The pain was bright and small, smaller than she had expected. Soraya's other hand came up and closed around Imaris's wrist. And the bond. The great singing thing in her chest. The thing that had been pulled and twisted and hammered for 11 months. Opened. She had not known until that moment that she could do this. She had not known any wolf could do this. Through the bond, she felt Kaelin come around the last corner of the corridor at a full run, in human shape, his sword in his hand, his eyes the color of new gold. Through the bond, she felt every wolf in the citadel below, every wolf in the city, every wolf within 50 leagues, lift its head. And through her hand, against Imaris's wrist, the bond poured outward. Not as power, not as fire, as truth. Every wolf within reach of Soraya's bond saw, for one long shining second, exactly what had been done. The drop of moonbell oil into the cup. Doran's hand closing the vial. Imaris's mother in the long stone-floored room of House Vorland the night before, laying out the plan. The knife at Vesna's throat. The crossbows on the south road. The 121 days of Kaelin tearing apart his own kingdom looking for the woman his enemies had taken from him. The orchard. The blanket. The snow. Every wolf in Merwyn saw it. Every wolf in Merwyn knew. Imaris of House Vorland stood frozen with her wrist in Soraya's hand, and her dagger still half raised, and her pale green eyes went very wide, because she could feel. She could feel. The city she had thought she was conquering turning, around her, like a great slow wheel, against her. Below them, in the lower halls, the fighting changed. Soraya felt it through the bond as a single great sigh. The Vorland soldiers who had still been holding 3 corridors of the citadel laid down their swords. The 17 old houses who had been marching just then through the north gate to crown a new queen turned, and stopped, and began, without any word being given, to ride home. Imaris's knees buckled. You, she whispered. You cannot. I can, said Soraya. It seems I can. Drop the knife, sister. The dagger fell. It rang once on the stone and lay still. Kalen came around the last corner of the corridor and stopped. He took in the scene in front of him in a single sweep of his honey-colored eyes, the two unconscious guards in the linen alcove, Doran on his knees with Lyric standing over him, his mother white and shaking against the wall. Emeris of House Vorland on her knees with her hand still trapped in his wife's grip. The thin red line on Soraya's left forearm. The teapot on the table in the open solar. The third cup. And his wife. Standing, heavy with their twins, in the middle of all of it, with a bone token at her throat, and his cloak around her shoulders, and a long, thin cut on her arm, and a look on her face that was, more than anything else, tired. He crossed the corridor in 5 strides and gathered her against his chest with a small, wordless sound. I told you, he said into her hair, to stay on the ridge. I lied, said Soraya into his shirt. I know. I am sorry. I know. I will probably do it again. I know. He laughed. It was a wet sound. He held her very tightly and very gently, both at once, and he did not, for a long moment, let her go. It was over. She had not known until that moment that some part of her, since the night of the coronation hall, had been waiting for the next blow, the next betrayal. She had been holding her breath for 4 months. Now, slowly, she let it out, and her knees went, and Kalen caught her exactly the way he had caught her every other time she had begun to fall. My queen, my heart, come and sit down. He carried her into the solar. He did not, despite everything, set her on the couch where Emeris had been waiting. He sat with her in the deep window seat instead, where the morning light came through the tall glass and lay warm across her belly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Soraya, against the warm hollow of his throat, said, I would like to go home, Kalen. You are home, my heart. I would like to go to our home, the small one, the one with the tower window your mother says you used to climb out of when you were 11. He laughed, shakily. Yes. I would like to have our children there. Yes. I would like to be married, properly, with a witness who is not bleeding from the throat, in front of all of your people, before the babies come, so that no one can ever again say I am not your wife. Yes. I would like anything, he said into her hair. Anything in this world or any other, my heart. Yes. 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 She closed her eyes. The babies kicked, both of them, gently, against his hand. The wedding took place 6 days later. It was held at Soraya's request, not in the great coronation hall, but in the high stone chapel above the orchard, the place where Kalen had first marked her 11 months earlier. 400 or 500 wolves crowded into the chapel that morning, and another 2,000 stood, in human shape and in wolf, on the long, sloped meadow outside. Soraya wore a dress of pale gray wool, edged in silver embroidery she had stitched herself. She wore the bone token openly at her throat. She wore, around her shoulders, the half blanket from her travel sack, sewn back together with the half Doran had carried out of Merwin into a single ragged gray square. The seam ran down the middle of her back. Vesna stood as her witness. The Queen Mother had recovered some of her color, though she would never, the healers said, fully recover the use of her right hand. I have a left hand, she had said briskly, the morning Soraya tried to apologize for her. I have a son. I have grandchildren coming. I have a daughter at last. I am child. Very rich. Lyric stood at Soraya's other side with her sword drawn. A ceremonial gesture. But Lyric was not a woman who held a sword ceremonially, and the steel was bare. Kalen wore the deep red of his wolf. His hands shook slightly when he took hers. His honey-colored eyes, when he met hers across the threshold of the chapel, were full. When the high speaker laid his hand upon their joined hands and pronounced them bound under all the gods of stone and forest and sky, the cheer that went up from the meadow shook snow from the roof of the chapel. Soraya did not, that day, cry. She had cried enough. She smiled instead, with her hand in her husband's hand and her children kicking gently inside her dress, and she let herself be kissed by him in front of 2,000 witnesses, while every wolf in the meadow howled. The twins were born 16 days after the wedding. It was a long labor. Old Branna, whom Soraya had insisted on having sent for, all the way from Hollowmere, said the boy was simply taking his time and the girl was waiting until he had settled. Kalen sat on the bed behind Soraya through the whole of it. He let her grip his hands. He had been told, very firmly by Branna, that men in birthing rooms who spoke were of no use to anyone, and so he kept his mouth closed and his arms around her and did not let go. The boy came first, in the small gray hour before dawn. He was dark-haired like his father, with eyes the midwife declared, with some surprise, to be a soft pale green. He cried very loudly, and did not stop until he was set against his mother's breast. The girl came a quarter of an hour later. She had a thatch of pale hair almost white, and her eyes were the exact deep amber of her grandmother's. When the midwife laid her against Soraya's chest beside her brother, she did not cry. She simply opened her eyes, looked once around the room as though taking its measure, and laid her small wrinkled hand against her brother's cheek. Kalen made a sound behind Soraya that she had never heard from him before. Soraya, look at her. I am looking, my love. She is looking at us. I know. He pressed his face into the curve of her neck and he wept, and she did not, this time, weep with him. She held their children against her chest, and she watched the dawn come up through the high tower window, and she thought of a girl of 17 on a winter road 4 winters ago, kneeling in the snow to tear a blanket in half. She had not known then, could not possibly have known, that her whole life had just turned, on the small bone hinge of one act of kindness, toward this room, toward this morning, toward these 2 small breathing weights on her chest. The Queen Mother of Merwin had not, after all, forgotten. She had come to her son's bedside the morning after the snow and had told him, with tears in her amber eyes, "Kalen, there is a girl. I would not be sitting in this chair this morning if she had not knelt in the road to me last night. Find her. And when she is grown, if she will have you, marry her. She is the one. I have seen it." Soraya had not, of course, known any of this. She had not known the young Alpha Prince of Merwin had ridden into her village 3 weeks later under a false name and had stood in the doorway of her grandmother's cottage in a borrowed coat and watched her grind elderberries for an hour and had said to his mother that night, "I see why, mother. I see why." She had not known he had come back the next year, and the next, under 100 small pretexts, until he had found a way to be introduced to her. She had not known the man she had loved. In the beginning, as a kind young noble at her village's edge had been the king of Merwin the entire time. She knew it now. He was sleeping beside her, his hand resting open against the cradle. The room was full of the slow, soft sound of small new lungs breathing. Outside the window, the wolves of Merwin were beginning to lift their voices. Not in grief, not in fury, but in welcome. The 2 pale notes of a true royal birth rolled across the rooftops of the city. Soraya looked down at her son and her daughter. The girl had opened her eyes. The amber gaze that had once met Soraya's in the snow looked up now from the cradle of her mother's arm. Soraya smiled. "Welcome, little one," she whispered. "Welcome home." In the years that followed, the people of Merwin would tell the story many ways. Some told it as the story of a king who had lost his mind for love and torn his realm apart, and somehow found his way back. Some told it as the story of a queen mother who had walked out of her sick room in time to save her house. Some told it as the story of a betrayer who had served 31 years and chosen, in the last second, the wrong loyalty, and had been spared, in the end, by the queen he had tried to kill, on the only condition that he live out his days in a stone monastery on the far western coast. Doran, when last anyone heard, had been keeping bees, but the version the children of Merwin were told, in the small dark hour before sleep, was always a simpler one. It was the story of a girl of 17 who walked home through the snow one winter night and found a shivering old woman on the steps of a ruined chapel, and tore her only blanket in half without thinking very much about it. It was the story of how that small kindness had walked, quietly, all the way through the years on the girl's behalf, through orchards and ceremonies, and poison and exile, and corridors with crossbows in them, and had brought her, in the end, to a tower window above an orchard, with a sleeping king at her side and 2 new children at her breast. The Queen Mother of Merwin had not forgotten. The Queen Mother of Merwin never did forget. And in the great long ledger of the world, where every act of kindness is written down, even the very smallest, the ones the giver never thinks of again, the entry beside Soraya's name was a long and a shining one, and the children of Merwin would tell it, and tell it, and tell it again, for 100 years. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this story has warmed you the way Soraya's blanket once warmed a stranger in the snow. If it did, please consider staying with us for the next one. There are many more kindnesses and many more wolves waiting in the dark.